Alright, everybody, we are back. Right now we're going to take a quick look at how the encounters work inside of the labyrinths. This right here, now, I kind of outdid myself on this one, I'm not going to lie. Overall, it's not a perfect system, but I never realized just how hard it is to actually implement one of these systems. So what I want to do is I want to kind of walk you through how exactly to implement your own, and to put in your own spawns, as well as your own loots. So let's go ahead and get started. So there's two main elements to the system. It's going to be the EncounterDef up over here. My marker. So the EncounterDefs themselves, if you remember, this was from the Labyrinth Def right here. And this right here was the list of encounters, right? This comes from the other video. What I've done is that this is the normal list of encounters for the Voldurum adventure, and I've switched it out for these test encounters. The reason why I've done this, these are earlier encounters, and the reason why I've done this is because I've given them these glower properties over here, so they're easily spotted on the map. So that's so basically it's going to be the same thing. So now we're going to take a look at how exactly we get these encounter defs to put into your labyrinth. All right. So as I stated, I went ahead and gave each of these different glower colors. So the basically the cooler the color, so purple is going to be the easiest. You see this blue right here, that's going to be, so there's 5 total, so that's going to be B, right, the second one. Green is going to be the middle one. We see an orange down here. This right here is going to be the second to last, and red is going to be the hardest one. So the red, I went ahead and, so this is going to be the main one that we're going to be taking a look at, is this red one down here. Okay, so this is the encounter def for that red one. This is test encounter E, right, which is the last one. And this is going to be set up as a mini boss encounter, so that's why I went ahead and selected it. So first off, you know, standard fare, def name, label, all that good stuff. So right here we're going to have enemy spawner names. So it's going to take in a list of pawn kind defs. Oh, I'm sorry, no, shit. What the fuck am I talking about? This is going to be thing defs. Well, thing def names with the spawner comp property. And that's what we have right down here. So you see that for my test spawner E, which is what I have listed over here, you can see that I have my my spawner properties right over here. Outstanding. Okay, likewise, you can see that we have a list for our loot spawners. The loot spawners are spawned in at the same location as the enemy spawners. The idea is that the loot spawners can automatically drop their loot. This right here is to produce a little bit more of a dynamic thing. Now, you don't have to be it doesn't have to be a mini boss to have the loot spawners. Any encounter can have the loot spawners on them. The loot spawners are just going to be normal spawners like everything else, except there's going to be a special thing we have to do to get them to drop their loot. And we're going to take a look at the spawners in a little bit. So next up we have our encounter level. So this right here is actually the most important number out of all of this, so I'm going to circle back to that. Right over here, next up we have our mini boss. This is a tag that you should only give to one encounter inside the whole thing. If you give it to an encounter, and there's 2 of them, right, with or 2, or if you give it to one, there's another one with it as well, then one of them is going to be excluded. Basically, the idea is that if this is true, then you also need for this to be 100, right? So for it to be a mini boss, the encounter level should be at 100, and the idea is that it's going to be at the very end of the labyrinth. The spawn spread is going to be how far away from the center point that the spawners will spread out from. So the idea then is that if they spawn right here, so the spawn spread is actually really tight, so they're only going to spawn out or spread out very, very short way. So in this case, 1. Alright. So, and that's going to be how the spawners spawn in. I know, right? A whole lot of spawning going on. Alright, so now for the spawners. So right here, I made custom spawners, each with their own glowers. So like that, you can see how the encounters go out. So this right here is to help us take a better look at that encounter level coming up. So for the spawners themselves, they're pretty much just going to be regular buildings with the comp property for pawn spawner. If you want it to be an actual spawner, not a loot spawner, then basically the only difference here, if you take a look, so actually let me go ahead and alright, so scratch that. Let me go ahead and back up. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at encounter level real quick, just so we can talk more about the other things later. Alright, so right here we have the encounter level is going to be how deep in the dungeon the encounters spawn. So what I did is that I have it set up to where it goes basically from purple to red, and this is the easiest to the hardest. And basically what we're doing is, if you look here, what it's doing is that it's counting how many steps it goes up the labyrinth, right? And it uses this number to determine how powerful the spawns are at that step, or at least how powerful they can be. So what it's going to do, so right here, this is the path going back here, and then I can actually count the number of steps. 14, 15, 16 steps to this one. So this right here has 16 steps, and then so yeah, so the idea then is that this is how many steps it takes, and then you can see down here that this would actually end up taking more steps. So that's why this is actually the end of the instance, because this is going to have the highest step count. So what it's going to do is you can kind of see from this right here that as you get further back, the spawns actually get harder. So in the very beginning, you can see that we have these light purple spawns, right, which are going to be the easiest spawns because they're the closest to the beginning of the instance. Now for these spawners that are spawning inside of the rooms, what they're doing is that they're actually taking an average of all of the spawns around them. So for example, right here, this is step count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what it's going to do is that this is going to have an average. So this room, so actually technically, this room right here is going to have the average of all of these. All right, and that's how this is all determined. So as you can see, it works out pretty well actually. So as I get through, you can see that I have a darker blue, more of a teal color. Then down here I have a green. Down here I have an orange, and finally I have a red. So as I get deeper into my dungeon, there's another green. Then you can see that the spawns got harder. Likewise, you can also see that I still have easy spawns towards the end. So this is a step 16, yet it has a purple spawn at it. The way that this works is that the list, this list right here, you remember that I asked you to order it in order of difficulty. All right, whatever one's the most difficult, you should put it first. And this is basically how it's rolling off against like what gets spawned there. So the idea then is, let's say that this step count is 100, this step count is 80, 60, 40, and 20. Then what's going to happen is that, think of these as being percents. And this is going to be the percent of the total step count. So let's say that this labyrinth had a maximum of 18 steps inside of it. So this is going to be 20% of 18, 40% of 18, 60% of 18, 80% of 18, 100% of 18, right? And what's going to happen is that the, I have to check the exact equation, but yeah, but basically it's going to roll against, the percent chance for each one. So, so right here then, so for example, the 20% one, so whenever I'm 20% inside of the dungeon, now I can start encountering my encounter A. Now I can encounter A all the way through to the 100% of the dungeon. In fact, my chances of encountering A go up as I get further into the dungeon. So this is why you want it to roll last. right? So the idea is that encounter E will always have, well, in this case this is a mini boss, but encounter D will always have a lower chance of winning its roll versus encounter A, right? So let's say I'm like down here at the very end part of the dungeon. Well, encounter D is going to get a roll and encounter A is going to get a roll, right? Encounter A is probably going to have about an 80% chance of spawning this late, while encounter D is only going to have a 30% chance. So therefore, what it's going to do is going to roll down each one. So it's going to test what's his chance of spawning here. What's his chance, then what's his chance, what's his chance, what's his chance. And if nothing wins its roll, then nothing spawns there. Likewise, if you want to make sure something always spawns there, then you give it an encounter level of 0. Right? This is always spawns. So if something has an encounter level of 0, then it will default to that encounter level. And basically, yeah, so therefore you won't end up with any empty rooms whatsoever. Okay, so enough about that. Let's talk about these spawners, since, once again, they're kind of complicated. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at all this. Ooh. Leave all that out. Alright, so for these spawners, so once again, the difference here is that this is for an encounter, so this is a bad guy, right? And this is loot. The only difference you notice, so first off, is player. This is if you wanted to spawn a human player or not. Thirds between spawns, a third is equal to 1/60th of a second. So so this is a tick. Right, this is the same thing as a game tick, which is a third. So this is what the distance between each spawn will be. This is the number that you want to spawn. So if you want to have 100 people come out of one spawner with 1 tick in between each one, you can do it. Pawn kind, this is just going to be the pawn kind def of whatever you want to spawn there. Newborn, this I kind of just broke it out because it was there. Self-Destruct, this is if you want it to blow up, if you want the spawner to disappear after it is done, dropping its load, basically. So what this means is that you're going to, so it's basically going to disappear. How's that sound? Is proxy basically determines if the spawner operates off of a proximity sensor. It's very similar to the chests. So the idea is that if it's inside of a room, right, and then there's a hallway, so let's say it's inside this room right here, and then your people are walking through the hallway, then they can trigger through the hall, right, through the wall, and that's why these guys come running out at you. So this is going to be the proximity trigger. Damage switch, basically what you can do is that you can set a certain % damage for it to trigger at. It defaults to 50. But the damage switch is so if you want it to be to where you have to start damaging something before it spawns something else at you. Like, so you say, oh, it's a hive or something like that. So it's more of a reactionary thing. Get drops. So this right here determines if you get the drops of the spawner whenever it disappears. What's going to happen is that whenever it does disappear, if this is true, which you can see it's true for both of them, which I don't think it should be true for both of them. I need to check that. But the idea here is that this is what enables you to get the loot from the spawner as it drops, right? And this is this is the main mechanism I use for dropping items into here. So for example, right here, you can see that I have a cost list for this. And this cost list are the drops, right? So this is the loot. And the idea is that you can see that this guy spawns no pawns. And even though, so therefore it doesn't really matter what I put for any of these. And what it does do is that it self-destructs. And this is not proximity, not damage, right? So therefore, oh, and you can also now put them to searched. I'm sorry, this is an old one. But yeah, so anyway, so it's not proximity, it's not damaged, right? So therefore, it's just going to be on itself. So it's just going to blow up after 15 seconds. It's going to drop its load. Its load is 0. After it's dropped its load, it's going to self-destruct. When it self-destructs, it's going to drop its drops. And those drops are going to be 500 steel, 250 plasteel, 30 industrial components, and 10 spacer components. Boom. Right? So this right here was basically just a really easy way for me to port in things into the game. I can actually make the cost list anything I want, so you can put in specific items into here. Proximity radius is going to be the radius for the proximity trigger. This right here is 3, which is really small. I think for the normal spawns, I have them all the way up to like 10 or something like that. So the lure job is going to be the job that the pawns who spawn have, right? So you can have assault, defend base, siege, shit. There's quite a few of them that I busted out. I'm gonna have to get an exact list of them. But the idea here is that this is going to be the Lord job, or the immediate job that the pawns are going to try to do whenever they're on there. If you put assault, they're going to try to seek out the your pawns anywhere on the map, right? So therefore, as soon as you come in, if they're spawned, they're going to rush you. Defend base means they kind of lull around where they were spawned in at, and they just kind of defend the area. All right. I think that pretty much wraps up the spawners. Ah, shit. Alright. Good times. So yeah. So overall, as you can see, it's fairly complicated and a little bit overdone. But, you know, whatever. More than anything, just kind of play around with it. The spawners, they feel like a pain in the ass, but all that it really is that, I mean, just the more that you do it, you're going to see that it's just an exercise in copy-paste. The reason why this is put to get drops, it shouldn't be, but it can be because I don't have any cost list over here. But if I did, I can put this to false, and then it won't drop anything anyway. But yeah, so over here though, this is why this is a loot spawner. So you can see that there's no difference. I just set this up as a loot spawner by spawning nothing and by giving it a cost list and telling it to drop that cost list whenever it dies. So okay, yeah, that's the spawner system. Yeah, hope y'all like it.